drawing samples along, and then it will all be happy and shiny.
5 minutes.
Okay, our video camera isn't quite working, so we're just going to start ahead without it.
Oh, good. All right.
Welcome to the How to Draw Ponies panel. You will notice you have a piece of paper and pencil along with you. This means that you draw along if you so desire. So, first things first, to draw a pony, get a reference, a nice happy screenshot, another thing, something from another artist, or a real life horse, doesn't matter. Get a reference, references are important. Sorry, I tend to be soft-spoken. Use references, yay.
Yes, wait a minute.
My
Sorry
apologies.
about this. You should hear his live streams. You have to everything.
One of the first things you do with a reference is you can copy it. And copying a reference helps you teach you to learn anatomy and proportions and all that kind of fun stuff. However, we're going to skip ahead a little bit. And we're going to change the pose. So, first things first when drawing, make a mess. Make an absolute mess. The mess you make is based upon the things that are there. You have a circle for a head, and so you have all these strange little circly shapes. So go ahead and make your own circly shapes. Circly shapes, and then you have a spine somewhere in there, so the spine goes down to the chest, and then you have a rump. And the size of the rump and the chest are rather small, and you have a big head. So let's look about proportions. Now you can fudge things just a little bit, stylistic interpretations, that kind of thing, but you don't want to go too far. You don't want a giant head, itty bitty legs. It doesn't quite work. If you can make it work, more power to you.
Yes.
So we use the reference, we measure and compare. Let's say we have a little itty bitty neck here. So we're using a little itty bitty neck there, and we're making something messy. Go ahead, make a mess. Don't press too hard and get really dark. This is light, airy, playful. Be playful with the drawing.
Speak. Oops. One key thing you really want to remember with this, always look back at your reference. Don't just have it to the side and glance at it occasionally. Always go back. It's like, oh, make a circle. Oh, wait, is this right? No. Erase. Always undo, redo, anything you want to do. This original mess, make as many mistakes as you want, go through them, and eventually you'll start to see the pony come through all of that mess, and then you can move on to what he is doing now.
One of the things you do with this mess is you're going from general to specific. So you have those general circles, and they're big circles, and they're ugly circles, and you have a little line mess thing. Well, then you work on more of an outline. You get a little more specific. You look at your thing, and you say, okay, the belly comes over the haunch here, so let's have a little over. And we have this still, it's just a big mess. Look how ugly it is. Oh, no. Don't worry about it. You can have a mess. Messes are okay. Because with the magic of digital, with the magic of an eraser, you can lower the opacity and your mess kind of slowly fades away. And you can erase, you can do other things. Now, I'm going to be going fast and it's going to be messy, and I've done this a billion times, so don't rush yourself too much. You don't have to rush. But I'm going to go through the process. So you've made this mess and you have no idea what you're doing. Now you're doing a bunch of corrections to the mess. So let's see, maybe the ear's a little more over here. And we have hair here doing something. I don't know quite yet what it's doing, but I'm going to make another mess. But it's a smaller mess. That's what general to specific means. You go from general to slightly less general to slightly less general. And using this method, you don't have to draw every single individual hair first. No. You draw the clumps of hair. And then you can get more into the specific parts. And you can get more into the specific parts. And then general towards specific. And eventually you have hair, and maybe there's an eye here.
You slowly want to add in the details. Start very big, and then you can add in all the little things.
You know, everybody wants to start with the little things. That's the intuitive grasp of drawing, is you want to start with the itty-bitty things, because they're the prettiest things, they're the great things, but you have to have that solid foundation first. So.
Also, if you guys ever have a question, just...
I'm cheating because I'm using digital.
Yes. Digital, the ultimate cheat tool. But if any of you ever have a question, know some little specific detail Viwa has gone through already, but he went through a little too fast, let us know. Raise your hand, throw a pencil at us, anything. Well, don't do that.
Questions are very welcome.
But anyone, no throwing. Anyway, if anyone does have a question, just speak up, say anything now.
Now, we look at this and we're like, wait, there's something wrong with this nose bridge and this eye and all that stuff here. And it's great. Making mistakes is great because at least you put something down. Because if you feel putting something down, you never get anything done. But if you just throw it down, you make a mistake, you're like, let's correct that. So you come back in, you're like, maybe that's a little more straight. Maybe that goes a little over there. Flat eye eraser and just oh no, we don't went away. Now, the unfortunate thing about digital is it tends to erase things completely. The great thing about traditional is it's never quite gone, so you always have a little bit of what you did, so you can tweak it a little bit here or there. So I'm going to alter what I did. Move the muzzle a little bit, move the eye. Over here, look back and forth to my reference, because my reference is a nice happy guide for proportions and anatomy and curves and composition and colors and everything. References. So I'm a bit repetitive on that because it's kind of important.
Again, references are your best friend. You can never have enough.
So you get them.
Unless, of course, you spent all your time gathering references and never drawing.
So
That makes artists cry.
we generally get a little more specific, and before you know it, you are into the detail area, and you're all sorts of happy because you finally made it to details, and you can do the fun stuff. So let's face it, details are fun. All right.
One thing we did not mention, volumes, general shapes of ponies. We mentioned this circles for the head, the body, and the little stick figure things for the legs to figure out joints and things like that. But one thing you want to remember is heads are spheres, the legs are cylinders, tails, manes, they all have their own shapes.
Yeah, it's really easy to approach art as if it's flat, as if the thing you're drawing is flat, because you're on a flat digital canvas. Can't really put my hand into that projector piece. Doesn't quite work. But you have to give the illusion of three-dimensional space, and this works through volumes, and we're getting a little bit of feedback. And what a volume is, it's the difference between a circle. It's an ugly circle, but it's okay, because we can correct it. Circle and a sphere. So what's the difference? Well, one has volumes. And what a volume means in the long run for your pony is a lot of overlap. So let's zoom in a little bit here, and let's do a little bit of a face. Now with the ear, we have a very long outside and a less long inside. It's kind of like a lemon with a quarter of it cut out. And what the ear is going to do is it's going to come into the head shape a little bit. So we have that little bit of overlap. It's coming in, and that gives us a sense of volume. Now we can do the same thing with hair, is that you have all these wonderful spikes, and you want a variety in your spikes. You don't want to do the same spike a dozen times. But when the hair comes in the form a little bit, we get a sense of overlap, that some chunk is in front of another chunk. Now, I'm disobeying the rules of general to specific by finishing the hair first and then not having the eyes or the muzzle or anything like that. Why you don't want to do that is because now if I draw the eyes and they're over here, and the muzzle's over here, and all of a sudden that hair is in the wrong angle. So if you go from general to specific, everything gets a little bit at once, or like this. So you can correct the hair as it's coming together, and you don't have to redraw everything you just drew over and over again. All right, are there any questions so far? Is anybody confused? Is anybody like, mine's not looking good?
Yes.
When you made that, when you made the vision feature to this cross thing, are the eyes above or below? Like when you.
That's a good
original
point.
circle, the guidelines that went through the head. Eyes, a large, if you're going for show style, most of the time the eyes are about 2/3 above it. Would you say that, or like right in the center of it?
If you're going for show style, the show has a very, very, very large eye socket, so there's no forehead space, next to no forehead space. So it's you get a little more than half above that, but then your muzzle comes all the way down here. And the eyes actually dip below the muzzle just a touch in show style. So let's draw a pony rolling her eyes. She's like, you're drawing me,
Don't be afraid to draw circles. I know that it sounds pretty simple, but it seems pretty hard to perfect. But the truth is that lots of artists cannot draw a perfect circle like in just one take. When you're under sketching, it's pretty much just keep drawing the circle over and over until it's circular. And I mean, it's the under sketch, so it's not supposed to be perfect. And
you can
I mean,
correct.
shapes aren't exactly perfect. Ponies are not perfect spheres, so it's okay if it's not quite perfect. You can tweak it and you can erase and redraw. But that's a step that lots of artists actually, or lots of aspiring artists actually have a bit of trouble overcoming, is the circles, but circles are not that scary.
Triangles.
Triangles are evil.
Any
But
geometric shape, anything like that, you start out with just trying. And say I'm trying to make a triangle and I end up with this shape. And I'm like, ooh, that's not a triangle at all. So I kind of try to straighten it out and maybe straighten this out and maybe that. And that's still not the triangle I want. So you keep going.
how do we end up on triangles? But
You keep correcting.
yeah.
And
This brings us back to one point: the mess. You want messy sketches.
now, you want your sketch to be a mess in the beginning. That way you have a foundation to work from.
And if
Everybody wants to make it perfect. You want to make a great, perfect thing, but that's the end. In the beginning, you make a mess, you refine it, you go from general to specific, towards specific. It's not a jump from general to specific. It's general, less general, less general, less general, and eventually you get to specific. You'll figure it out when you get there. So we still have the sketchy pony here. Let's just keep working. So again, ear shape, little football, bunch of hair here. Let's get a little more refined. Question?
Yes.
I seem to be having a hard time with the neck.
The neck. All right. Pony necks are actually a little longer than people like to give them credit for. They have this wonderful shoulder space here. So let me make sure I can control Z. And the pony neck is about, what would you say, half a rump's width tall in its own space. But
About
the
half the
space
size
of itself is actually quite large. So neck attaches at the back of the head. You want to fear the bobblehead. You don't want to make a pony head with the neck going in like this. That's not good. It attaches at
Next.
the back of the head.
Normally, right where you put the bottom of the ear, you can assume the neck is right around there.
Yeah, it's quite
And then the
close.
front of the neck, a little above the halfway point for the head.
Again, references tell you the answers for the things, and they're a bit thin.
And you had a question now? Yes.
Hind legs, wonderful thing.
Hind?
You've got the haunch, and one of the things that's important to understand for anatomy is joints. So we come back to our reference and we understand ponies have a knee, but it's very, very high. We see where this knee is. It's very high up. And then this is angle, and it goes into the hoof foot area. And you'll notice that her back leg is actually kicking back a little bit on the angle. So we come back to our sketch with the haunch, and we get little lines, and we keep it back. Because we're doing the general thing, we just want the general angle. Just keep it back. Maybe correct our proportions a little bit. Where's the hoof? Somewhere around here. It's a big mess. We're making a mess. Lower the opacity, new layer. For traditional, it's generally sketch lighter.
Another thing to remember with the shape, this is just a nice little tool I figured out at some point. I have no idea where I thought of it. It's the flank is about an egg shape. Rest of the leg, cylinder. Put them together and you end up getting close to a back leg shape.
One of the difficult lines for drawing a leg is this front line. And people like to start with the front line because it's the most prominent line. It's not quite, it's more It's a little more efficient to end with this front line when you're going to specifics, simply because figuring out how thin this part is in the beginning, it's not quite intuitive.
You don't want twig legs, but you don't want big meaty legs because then they shouldn't be working.
Yeah, so you come in a lot here in the beginning and then it kind of curves out. And it doesn't feel like that when you see it as a whole. It doesn't feel like it's coming in too much, but it really does. Any other questions?
Please ask questions. Yes.
Wings.
Wings.
Wings are a wonderful thing. I should have a wing reference, but unfortunately we don't have access to the internet at the moment. So,
Actually, we do.
we do have access to the internet.
But
But I want to do it without looking at references. I've done this 1,000 times. Don't do like me. Use references. All right.
yes.
Wings are a bit of a kite shape. And then we have this front circle, and it points back, and it points up a little bit. Now, you want the overall, you want to get the general shape first. If you're just drawing an oval, that's fine. That's great. That's a start. But you have an oval, and then you realize, okay, it has to point up, so let's have an end point somewhere around here. So let's point it up, somewhere to go up there. And there's three little bumps in it. Now, where you put those bumps, how you put those bumps, you can vary it a little bit. Wings are organic. Now, let's be a little complicated. Let's put a lot of little bumps. Bump, 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 bump. And a little more, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Yay, we have a wing. Now, for more show style, they just have a couple little lines.
This is the 3-1.
that come
But
out. 3 or 4, depending on the bunny.
for open wings, you actually approach them in a very similar manner to the legs, with the mapping out the joints,
Joints.
and then depending on how you want to go with the feathers, show style, fairly simple. It's study your reference and look at the shape.
Look at the shape. I usually like to mark out where things end first. That way I don't have to worry about, okay, I got 1 finger, 2 finger, 3 finger, 4 finger. Because when you do something like that, for wings or for hands, you end up with a shape like this. And that doesn't look very organic. That's not a happy hand, and it's not a happy wing. Doot, doot. But if we start out with the endpoints like I am here, you can kind of fit together the lines. I'm not going to do everything all at once. Again, general to specific. Make a mess, be ugly, do all this fun stuff, and then get a little more specific as you go along. Correct, recorrect. It's a big part of art is correcting. If you expect to make the perfect line every time, then
You will be very disappointed.
you will be sad. But if you're like, okay, I made a mistake, great, I'm just going to correct this. Come in and look, that's an ugly wing. Let's fix that wing. Come in.
While he's drawing a wing, any other questions? I saw that hand in the back first. Yes, you. Ears. Yes.
All right. Kind of a wing here. So I will
While
come
he's
in
drawing that,
correct a little bit.
I'll
But
explain
for
the
the
wing.
ear, go ahead. And
I'll explain the ear one. All right. When you saw the initial guidelines that he put on the head, the one through the center, one through the top. Another guideline I like to draw is one going about 45 degrees or in between those two lines, arcing over the head. That line is a great starting point for the top of the ear. I mean, the start of the ear. Now, depending on what kind of ears you want to go with, that determines the back shape of the ear. But with a show style, you probably want to end a little below the halfway point on the head. And remember to keep that lemon shape or the football shape to it.
American football.
That too, yes.
Eh.
That is to note that there are variances between different types of ponies. You'll notice that normal Pegasi, such as Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy, actually have different wing shapes from Alicorns, including Twilight Sparkle, but also Celestia and Luna. I think that Alicorn Twilight also has an extra feather when her wings are closed when drawn show style.
Yeah, There's quite a bit of variety, and you can feel free to experiment with wings, look at birds for references, and eventually, if you keep drawing, that's the important thing. You just have to keep drawing. It doesn't matter if you're really, really good from the start. Don't expect yourself to be really, really good from the start. It's like expecting yourself to be really, really good at baseball without playing a lot of baseball. Art is a skill developed like anybody else. The more you do it, the more you'll be better at it. The more you take others' advice, the better you'll be at it. So you can play around with wings, and you can get a bunch of different wing styles. And I have just made a mess all over my page.
Okay.
That's good.
Another question.
Oh, do you have any tips for different angles of, like, sideways?
Well, actually, yes. If you worked with the undersketching a lot, you figure out the basic shapes, start with those, and just really experiment with them.
So, like, start just from the side view, would you say?
Most
You
people
can start
tend to
from
there.
You can start from a side view. You can start from a front view. Becoming familiar with the anatomy takes a lot of drawing from screenshots, and you may want to do a few copies first, a few dozen copies first, a few hundred copies first. Before I drew ponies, I'd filled up 2 sketchbooks full of screenshots, so that's just how it is.
Yeah.
The more you draw, the more you learn.
And someone else with a question, right there.
What software do you use to draw like
This software right now is Paint Tool Sci. I use it for sketching. Other people use Photoshop. Other people use a whole bunch of different programs. Whatever is comfortable for you. I like Paint Tool Sci because it has a stabilizer, and my hands are also kind of shaky, and this would be my straight line without a little stabilizer. So.
Any tips on hooves?
Hooves.
That's my specialty. Yes. Hooves. First tip: the top is a little smaller than the top of the leg is a little smaller than the hooves.
So you don't want it to be exactly equal the whole way. You want to have a little bit of width to things as they come out. And exaggerating this width is perfectly fine. That's for a straight hoof. For something that's bent, find an empty space. What I really kind of stress as a drawing person is getting that volume in there, and that means getting this little bit of overlap here between this part of the leg and this part. So you have that overlap, so it clearly delineates the difference between hoof and leg. Next question?
how do you draw like muzzles from like a side view?
From side view? Muzzles in MLP are tiny little things. Let's go back to our reference. Let's look really, 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 really close. Look how small that space there is. It's a tiny little space that the muzzle comes out. It's tiny, tiny, tiny. So how do you do that? Well, first, you start with a circle, and you don't have to have a perfect circle. You just have to try to make it a little better each stroke. It's a little lower than half, so you can draw a halfway line. Guidelines are fine. Any guideline you want to use, you can use. And then just a little bump, and come in.
Another thing to help remember this: think of the muzzle as a rectangle
That
at
part
first,
isn't right.
and a cone. Just put those two together and wrap them up against the face.
So yeah, that's another thing about volumes is the more you understand volumes, the more you'll have their sense of where they go in 3D space. So you can just quickly put together.
And there's a guy in the back who's been trying to ask her a question for a while. Sorry.
Is there a trick to do with horns?
Horns? Actually, yes, I know this one too. It's remember I said the like 45-degree angle guideline on the head. If you draw that coming out of the front, just follow that line, and that's the exact point where the horn should end. No problem. And then he was next, then you.
How do you do open muzzle, like open mouth?
Okay, in MLP, we go back to our reference. Muzzle's pointed down just a touch, and the top part of the muzzle barely moves, if at all. So don't worry about it moving at all.
Unless it scrunches.
Unless it's a little bit scrunching, then it's just a line. Scrunchy face. But for an open muzzle, the lower jaw moves. It's like you when you're talking. Your lower jaw moves, your skull doesn't move when you're talking, hopefully.
In short, the lower jaw does all of the movement. That's where
So you want to draw
focus.
probably the mouth first. That way you have the end point for the lower jaw, and you can just bring it in. And so we had another question?
Yes, you had a question, right?
Yes.
Yes.
How would you draw muzzle in front? Like the viewer is looking at the pony from front.
Classic show style?
In classic show style, that's a lot simpler, but it's simply a little dash for
It's-
the top of the nose and the nostrils.
Yeah, it's simply a little line that's just above the bottom of the eyes. And it's just this little itty bump line. It's just kind of curved. The temptation is to curve it more, but if you do that too much, it kind of looks like a pig snout, and you don't want a pony with a pig snout.
Yes, pig snout ponies are
They don't get
terrifying.
it. You have unhappy ponies.
Question way in the back.
Working with vectors, that's,
Ooh,
have you ever done that? His process is similar, because my initial foray into it has been a completely different process than the rough sketch.
I have.
actually had a bit.
You have?
Yeah.
It's all yours.
I haven't had that much experience with it, but I do quite a, or not so much with ponies, but I do some vector art, and I find that the process actually is pretty different. In that rather than trying to get a bunch of lines to converge to make perfect lines and such, you're actually making the perfect line right on there and such. You can do lots of cool stuff with how you can merge shapes together, and you can say if you need like a crescent shape, then typically when you're drawing, you would draw the lines for a crescent just by themselves, or like have a circle and have a smaller circle and such. While in vectors, you can just like overlap two circles that are offset in a way to create a crescent if you subtract it and such. But it's a very, very different beast from the kind of drawing that we're teaching right now. There's lots of interesting tips and tricks that you can do with it.
Vectoring is its own kind of process and progress. This is more for general learning how to draw anything kind of thing. Anything you want to draw, you will go from general to specific. You'll have sketch stuff. It'll be neat.
Any tips on shade?
Shading. I like shading.
Back to volumes. That is a
So
key
let's-
thing with shading.
Let's find something that's a little more done. And you want to pick a light source. Now, something confusing about a light source is it has a front and a back. So you have to decide whether your light source is in front of your pony or behind your pony. And then upper left, upper right, lower right, who knows? You have the three directions, up, down, left, right, and front and back. You got to choose that, draw your arrow. And there's different kind of strengths of light sources. And there's different ways to do it. Since we're going with traditional, I'll do the additive method. So we have our volumes here. And we just kind of want to do some hatching. Let's do a hatching with shading. And there's shadows within shadows and highlights within highlights. It's kind of interesting how that works. So we're going to have a lot of different ways to approach it. You do a general shade of, okay, this is what shade it is. And then this is the impression you want, that's your general shade. And then you can find places where it's going to be a little darker. Let's say it's a strong light source, so we're going to have some nice darks here to make our lights look light. And we're approaching the haunch as kind of a sphere area. So we'll have a little underneath here and some reflected light coming up here. That's why I'm not going all the way to the edge, is because we'll have some happy little reflected light.
No.
And it's a cylinder, so it'll have a little bit over here because it's in front, so the shadow will curve around on this side, because that's how a cylinder works. If you need to know more about shading, shade a bunch of simple objects. Cylinders, spheres, cubes, pyramids, cones.
I actually suggest doing that first. That makes shading a pony, shading anything 100 times easier. If you know how to shade a sphere, a cylinder, you can easily apply that to any other drawing you're doing.
Yeah, you can shade the haunch or the head as if it's a sphere first and then come back in and correct it. That's one of the wonderful things about art, is you can simplify and then make it complex. You don't have to make it complex right from the get-go.
Well, oh, sorry, there was one question in the back first. Sorry.
I'm wondering if there's any other purpose. I notice a lot of learners that use paint for the sides.
Yeah.
While they store as well. Would you say
Oh.
there's any more that are not just limited to PC operating systems?
I have one. He completely hates it.
Sketchbook Pro is for the Mac. I don't recommend it. but
I do, but I'm evil, so.
I just for the longest time been trying to use Photoshop and
Photoshop isn't the most friendly for sketching.
But
It's kind of messy, but you can get used to it eventually.
one second.
Sorry.
I think so.
Yep, so that will work as well.
You had a question too?
Eyes.
Huh?
Eyes. Now, there's a lot of different eye styles out there, but if we go with show eyes, you have this circular kind of curve oval thing, and it's difficult to get in one go. So, first you have your head, and placement for the eyes, you want to get your lines in first. This is part of the volumes thing of, we have our midline, and we have the midline for the eyes, and it gives us a direction that the eyes are looking in. So we can change the midline for the eyes and be like, okay, let's look in this direction instead. So she's kind of looking over. Let's fix our circle a little bit, get a little bit of muzzle shape in there, just another circle. And for the eyes, let's bring them up. Get some ugly shapes in there first, just to fix our proportions and the like and our placement. And for the center of the eyes, between the eyes, it's usually kind of a straight line. Got this wonderful curve coming out, and the bottom can curve a little bit, but it can also have a little bit of straightness depending on your pony. Now Twilight has this kind of sharp edge here in the bottom, and giant irises. Ponies have giant irises and giant pupils, so go crazy with those.
This does remind me though, with other odd eye shapes, Princess Luna, Celestia, Rarity, Twilight, they all have little points, an odd shape. But one thing you want to remember is all of them, if you break it down, do have an oval-like shape to their eye, and it's just been trimmed down.
Mm-hmm.
So I always suggest start with the oval, and then you can approach unique eyes.
You can approach the eye. Getting Rarity's eye quite right takes recognizing that this outside part is kind of a straight line, or has some straightness to it.
And her eyelash comes through.
You don't want to do it too much like this, otherwise you have a very difficult time placing the iris and getting things to work right.
And yes.
Any tips for like using a given reference image to draw something different, like in a different pose or whatever?
Well, one of the wonderful things about references is you can use multiple references at once. And this means that you can have a pony reference for proportions and curves, and have a human reference for your pose. Now, one of the difficult things about changing from human to pony is that ponies are quadrupeds, humans are bipeds. Kind of a difference there. So it takes a lot of play. It takes just making the big mess of a sketch for, maybe you just want to copy the big mess sketch for the human pose and make it for what the human's doing, whatever they're doing. Let's say they're presenting a shiny little ball here. And then figure out how a pony would look doing that by just sketching pony parts on the human. And you have to do a lot of correction. You have to adjust for how the pony looks and how the pony proportions are being made and what's going on with the pony instead, how they would look. Like for a human, they might be looking down at the ball from here, but for a pony, they might be looking up. So you have to change things a little bit here and there, and you have to adjust depending on what your piece is. So you have to respond to what you have, not what you would like to have. So we have this giant mess, and I'm going to refine it a little more just to show how things can come together from a mess. Do we have another question?
No. But, oh, wait. She was first, sorry. Yeah.
How would you draw like the eyes in relation to the ears?
Now this, let's see. Ears are basically halfway through the eyes. At the end point is, and that's the only really tip I have for that. But, and yes.
What about like noses from muzzles, noses from from like a 45-degree turn?
Well, that goes back to what we were saying about volumes and learning the shapes of the muzzle. If you take it from the side view, and if you know what the basic shape of it is, and if you slowly turn the head, you'll see how it interacts with the head. And just slow, like that center guideline, move the shape with it. And then you only need to really focus on a bit of the overlapping lines and the core shape of it.
As you turn the muzzle forward, it'll have more of the top be visible. And that's generally my only guideline for it. References help understanding that the muzzle is tiny, tiny little muzzle. Helps.
You and your little muzzles.
They're tiny. Look at the show. Tails.
I will say this. If you're ever curious about where the tail should be placed, and if you've already drawn the tail, just assume it goes a little bit higher. Because after critiquing about thousands of drawings now, the one thing I see tons of people do is not know where the base of the spine is. And that's where the tail is. Where your tailbone is where an actual tail would be. If it goes any lower, I will not talk about that. But
You have the spine curve here with the back, and the tail just comes up off of that. It makes kind of a sharp angle, but it comes off. And you can just have fun with that. You don't want it to be so low that it feels like it's coming from somewhere else.
yes. And you had a question now.
Another suggestion about muzzles, seeing as the base is important. I see a female muzzle is small, but what about the male muzzle?
That one, I simply go back to the shape of the muzzle. As females have the little rectangle for the top of the muzzle and a cone-like shape for the bottom. Males is just a big box on the face.
Males have generally a large box on the face. You want to find the front of it first, usually. So you have your circle for the head, and like, okay, where is it? Somewhere like there? No, maybe, who knows? But you have a general idea, and you curve in just a little bit towards it. So it's not as much of a...
No, one prominent feature with the male muzzles that helps define their shape a lot more is the jawline. That is a huge thing with most of the male ponies. Big Mac has a big jaw coming out to the front of his muzzle. Flim Flam, very shallow one, but it's enough to give him a clear defined shape.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they are a lot more similar to real horses, I guess, than the female ones. I mean, if we take this by example,
I forgot you had that.
It's definitely very rectangular.
References.
Yep.
There's references.
Now,
It certainly has no other purpose.
there is one thing I want to mention, because I bet a lot of you might be thinking it. I might be wrong, but as you notice, he's not doing completely show style at all.
No, I'm not doing 100% show style. It's because you eventually find something that you're comfortable with. Now, there's a difference between being comfortable and being stagnant. And being comfortable with it is you could go back to show style, but you enjoy this. Being stagnant is you keep doing it because you can't
It's
figure
easy.
you can't figure a way out. It's like, oh, I keep doing that. I'm just going to keep doing that.
One thing,
You want to try something new.
I'll give an explanation and then get your question. It's, you want to figure out something that works. If you know the show style, that's a great foundation to work with. If you ever want to change styles, mess with things, you always have the show style as a foundation to build off of.
Yeah.
For me, I've got a giant hoof style, as in they're about the size of the head, maybe bigger if I mess up.
It's a bit ludicrous.
But then you can go full on realistic horses. But if you have this basis, a basic style to work from, you know you can make little tweaks all you want. Maybe you want bigger eyes, maybe you want to mess with the head shape a bit.
Once you have your foundation solid, your ponies become a lot more believable. And that's a great thing. You can look at other artists, you can look at what other people do, you can look at realism, anything you want to look at, as long as you have some basis or foundation to start from.
Now you had a question. Yes. Well, if you bring it up here, I can show you and then use this as an example and humiliate you in front of this whole crowd.
One of the things that's important to do is to draw large.
Now let's see.
If you're drawing on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper like this,
Okay, I
and your
think I can
and your
explain this
pony
one for
takes
you.
up this little corner, it's very difficult
if I
to correct things. It's very difficult to go back in.
Okay.
You're doing a lot of little itty bitty refinements, and then you get a cramp, and you're like, ah. You don't want to be angry while you're drawing. Draw big. The bigger you draw, the more your mistakes become obvious to you.
Now then, You are very nice enough to show us this. Now we'll make fun of you. Not really. We will help.
We will have minor critique.
There is one thing with heads. I don't know if any of you can see this. You three might be able to. Here. But eyes. When you draw those guidelines, you want to angle them with the head. Right now, I see you have very straight up and down lines. So if the pony was looking straight ahead, had a dead stare in their eyes, those eyes would look great on it. Because that means they're matched with the head shape, they fit on the head, and they're following the curve of the head. Right here, what you have is the pony looking down, but the eyes looking straight up and shaped. So they're facing straight up.
So things have to be consistent between different
I don't
parts.
mean to sound mean. I am very sorry.
If your muzzle is
But-
pointing forwards,
Would you mind
you
if
want
I-
your eyes to be pointing forwards, and you want your
There's the guideline for that.
everything. You want
This
your
is the
ear to make
general
sense
shape
with
you
that.
have
Everything
going.
has to be consistent with itself.
the
That's another
eyes
thing with general
shaped
to
like this.
specific. Let's get a new
Rolled
layer, 'cause
forward
that
a
one's
bit.
getting messy.
So they curve with the face.
Because you're approaching things
I hope
generally,
that makes sense.
you can change them. Let's say we want this pony to be facing forwards. Well, what the heck is this ear doing over here, and where's my eye shape? What's going on? Now, we want this pony to be facing forwards. We can move stuff a little bit. So let's say we have it forwards. No, let's move it up just a touch. So we have it up, a little more muzzle up. And just be consistent. Everything has to go up. If the eyes are going up, the ears will tilt back because ears attach at the back of the head.
Yes.
Is there any advice you have for giving a sense of emotion to it?
Action lines. Yes.
Action lines. Ooh, this is a
That's-
complicated one.
It's a complicated one, but the brief version of it is whatever motion you want having. Let's say you want a flying pony or a running one. Draw a line from the tail end of the motion through the motion. So like, let's say tail is up here and she's running that way. Start here and draw the line to where she's going. And then draw lines for the legs, the muzzle, just
Everything should
scratch lines.
be similar to that line. So we have the tail coming back here that's kind of pointing us in the direction of the action line. The leg here is going the same direction. The head, it will be going the same direction. The other leg, they kind of all point. If you have, so this action line makes sense. Say we have something else where we want our action line to be more swooshing up, but we have the pony looking down. It's not going to make sense with our action line. So the more prominent, the more things that are following the action line, the better. The general shapes going with the line. Whee! Pony just kind of floating up.
The action line should be a pretty fast drawn one, like it should be pretty natural of a curve.
Yeah. The slower you go, there's a bunch of tendencies in art that we instinctually do. And so the slower you draw your line, the more likely you are to make it either horizontal or vertical or straight. And
Very stiff.
for something to be organic, it's curved, it's playful, it's quick. So one of the great things about art is the faster you go, the more lively your piece looks. Now you can have a lively, ugly mess, but that's fine because you can come back in and correct it.
As we've said, ugly messes are good. You want those at
They're
first.
a good start. They're a wonderful start.
How do we go full circle on this? I have no idea.
Art is circular.
More questions? Sorry. You were first. Oh yeah, you can.
Come on down.
While she's coming up, another question. Quick, fire. I can look at this. Yeah.
Muzzles relative to
I got
eyes.
my own. Would
Let's-
you mind if I? Okay.
Let's go over that here while he's doing that.
Answer questions.
So one of the things about eyes
that
is you have the
initial
muzzle
shape you had.
square in the middle of it. And that's one of the great things about general to specific is regardless of which direction your eyes are facing, is if you're going general to specific, you can have that, you have the eye placement and the muzzle placement. Now, the muzzle placement is dependent upon where the eyes are. If you have your eyes here, and you have the front of the face here, you don't want to put your muzzle here, because muzzle goes in between the eyes. And the more references you use, the more this will make sense. Another question? You in the back? I'm sorry, can you speak up, please?
There you go. Does that help you?
The tail? I'm sorry, I can't hear him.
Well, what we said earlier with hair shape is you want to make them big, have a lot of volume to them, and then slowly add in little details.
So you can be wonderfully messy with hair in the beginning because you can absorb that mess into pretending that that's detail later. So you have a wonderful fluffy tail and bottom of the leg, bottom of the tail, they're about similar to me. You can have smaller tails, you can have whatever tail you want. Make a big mess, make a bunch of curves that go along kind of the same way. Now what you can do with that is, with general to specific, we have our overall shape, and so let's get some slightly smaller but still large shapes. So we have this big curve up here, this big curve down here, let's say that goes into there, and that goes into there. And then a little more specific, let's get a curve here, and maybe one out here, and I'm basing this all on the undersketch. And it looks like we're just about out of time.
One or two more questions. So
The aisle first.
I'll first, then you.
Are you guys actually going to finish the original sketch you started? I'm interested to see how it turns out.
Sure thing, we can go to that. And while he's working on that, I can answer the next. All right, that was an easy question, so both of you first and then you.
Yes.
You. Well, after her, sorry.
Proportions? Proportions are largely based on your reference. Go ahead.
Yes. Based on the reference, you can get a general grasp of what the proportions for that pony will be. There are a couple general rules you can follow for ponies. Sure thing. The head is about the same size as the rump. The rump is a little smaller than it. And then the chest
Is a little smaller than the rump. Now, we look at this and look how off that line is. So we can come
And
back
then-
in. And complicated things tend to get a little smaller as you're drawing them. So try to draw something like the face a little larger.
Last
And
question,
We're just
sorry.
about out of time.
Huh? Teeth. Those are fairly simple. If you have the mouth open, that's the only time you'll see them. Just two quick little lines and you can get them. You don't want them overpowering the mouth. You want them to be very compact, a little visible, but then they're good. Unless they're smiling, then it's huge lines and they're really visible. And unfortunately, I think that's it, right? We're done. I'm sorry about that. But if you want, you still have questions for us, we will be in the vendor hall. If you see us, ask us questions there.
Yeah, we'll be happy
if
to
you want-
start in the vendor hall. Just
No,
stop
no.
by.
And if you want to show us what you've drawn, you can easily bring that to us down there. All right, and
I hope all you had fun.
sorry
and
that
all
we
learned
didn't finish
something.
this.